Feng Tianwu's beautiful face that carried a slight smile was instantly covered in a layer of frost when she felt the gaze of the young man in embroidered clothes that wasn't concealed in the slightest. Strands of rage even leaped about in the depths of her eyes that were beautiful like jade pearls. "Young miss, I've been taken with you with a single glance. How about you have a cup of tea with me?" The young man brazenly sized Feng Tianwu up, and the almost flawless graceful figure of Feng Tianwu caused the greed within his eyes to grow deeper. He just didn't make a move to seize her right away. "As for these three people by your side, you help this young master properly entertain these three guests, and you must be courteous, do you understand?" The young man looked towards the servant by his side as he spoke. "Yes, young master." The servant seemed to be quite used to this, and he agreed before looking at Duan Ling Tian, Feng Wu Dao, and Elder Kong and said indifferently, "Come with me." Scram! Right at this moment, Feng Tianwu, whose face was covered in a ladder of cold lights, had finally spoken, and her voice was chilly, as if it made the surrounding air become slightly icy cold. The servant that assumed a haughty air couldn't help but be stunned, whereas, the gaze of the young man in embroidered clothes lit up instead, and he couldn't refrain from laughing. "It's been so long since I've encountered such a charming woman. Young miss, I'm really liking you more and more. Didn't you hear her asking you to FK off?" Right when the air in the surroundings of Feng Tianwu was roiling swiftly and the origin energy in her body seemed ready to gush out, Duan Ling Tian took a step forward and lightly held onto Feng Tianwu's hand to calm down her rage as he spoke out in a languid tone. "Kid, I'm talking to this young miss, what are you interjecting for? If it wasn't for this young miss, I'd make you incapable to speak right now." The young man's face sank as he stared at Duan Ling Tian with a ruthless gaze, and there was no lack of threats within his words. Humph. No matter how good a person was, there was still a time that he would become enraged, and Duan Ling Tian's face sank when facing the repeated provocation and nagging. Then he took a step forward before casually striking out with a punch. The punch struck the space before him, causing the airflow to be condensed instantly, and a terrifying wave of air swept forward. Bang! An ear-piercing explosion of the air resounded out. The horse beneath the young man remained unmoving, whereas, the young man himself was blasted out over 10 meters away to heavily fall with his face flat on the ground. The surrounding people that passed by couldn't help but laugh when they saw this scene. The young man, who was in an exceedingly sorry state, emitted shrill cries, and he looked at Duan Ling Tian with an extremely gloomy expression when he heard the laughter coming from the surroundings. "You actually dare hit me? No matter who you are, you're dead." Presently, the expression of the servant went grim as well, and he hurriedly got off his horse to charge towards the young man. "Young master, are you all right? Let's go." Duan Ling Tian seemed as if nothing had happened as he lightly smiled and spoke to Feng Tianwu. Feng Tianwu nodded and similarly didn't take the threats of the young man seriously. There wasn't an existence in this small imperial kingdom that could pose a threat to her. Duan Ling Tian's group of 4 continued to head towards the inner city. As for their destination, it was precisely the private courtyard house that belonged to Duan Ling Tian in the inner city. After walked for around half an hour. "It's him. Cousin brother, he injured me." An exasperated voice sounded out from behind Duan Ling Tian's group of 4. The young man in embroidered clothes who'd suffered a loss at Duan Ling Tian's hands earlier galloped his horse to chase up to Duan Ling Tian's group, and a young man in luxurious clothes that was a little over 30 sat on the horse by his side. The young man in luxurious clothes had a chilly and emotionless expression, and he imperceptibly exuded pressure onto others. Behind him was another old man that was more than 70, and the old man had an expressionless face as he followed behind the young man like a shadow. In the blink of an eye, the 2 young men and old man had galloped over to obstruct the front of Duan Ling Tian's group of 4 and stopped their passage. Meanwhile, many people that were passing stopped and watched from the sidelines. "It's the Su clan's 3rd young master." Many people recognized the young man in luxurious clothes. The Su clan's 3rd young master? Duan Ling Tian's calm gaze descended onto the young man in luxurious clothes, and the corners of his mouth suddenly curled into an arc that was filled with coldness. He didn't expect that the young man in embroidered clothes who he'd just taught a lesson would actually be related to the Su clan. Presently, the young man in embroidered clothes had an expression filled with complacency when he saw the bystanders had recognized the young man in luxurious clothes, and then he sat on the tall horse as she looked down at Duan Ling Tian. "Kid, you actually dared hit me? You're dead." When he spoke up to her, the young man in embroidered clothes looked at Feng Tianwu who was by Duan Ling Tian's side, and he changed the topic. "Of course, if she's willing to be my 3rd concubine, then I wouldn't mind allowing you to survive and only crippling your cultivation. You're courting death." Feng Tianwu's gaze went cold and was about to make a move and exterminate this detestable young man. But a tall figure had suddenly stood before her, causing her to temporarily stop any intention to make a move. "Only crippling my cultivation." Duan Ling Tian, who'd taken a stride forward to stand before Feng Tianwu, sized up the young man with interest as a ridiculing smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. "So in this way, you're considered to be showing mercy." "Of course." The young man seemed to have not realized the danger had descended, and he raised his head proudly. "If it wasn't because of her, I'd surely tear you into pieces and feed you to dogs. I hope your Su clan can give me a satisfactory explanation. Otherwise, I can only have a chat with Suboya myself. The ridiculing smile on the corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth grew deeper as his gaze turned suddenly to descend onto the old man that followed behind the other young man in luxurious clothes. The old man couldn't help but rub his eyes when he saw Duan Lingtian, as he seemed to want to confirm as he was seeing things. In the blink of an eye, Duan Lingtian had suddenly spoken such words, and coupled with Duan Lingtian looking at him, he'd completely confirmed it. It's really him. The old man's heart shuddered. He'd once seen this violet-clothed young man many years ago, as at that time, he was following behind the Su clan's patriarch Suboya. But compared to all those years ago, the violet-clothed young man had lost the immaturity on his face and had a sense of experience, and he gave people a feeling of maturity and stability. It was precisely because of this that he didn't confirm Duan Lingtian's identity at the first possible moment. Now, when Duan Lingtian suddenly spoke like this and looked at him, he knew that Duan Lingtian remembered him and had recognized him. "Who are you? You actually call my father by his name." The young man in luxurious clothes frowned as he looked at Duan Lingtian and asked with a low voice, "Third young master." Meanwhile, the old man behind the young man became anxious as he hurriedly said via voice transmission, He's Commander Duan." "Commander Duan? Which Commander Duan?" The young man frowned. "Embroidered uniform guard." The old man took a deep breath before slowly sending a voice transmission with these three words. "Embroidered uniform guard. Commander Duan?" When the young man heard the words embroidered uniform guard, his heart couldn't help but jerk, and when he connected the embroidered uniform guard with Commander Duan, his expression went pale. "It's him. It's actually him. Didn't he leave just 4 years ago? Why has he returned?" Even though he hadn't seen this person with his own two eyes in the past, but the reputation of the person before him was something that reverberated like thunder within his ears. It was even to the extent that even if this person were to kill him on the streets, his clan wouldn't dare take revenge for him. Even his father, the Su clan's patriarch, wouldn't dare hold resentment against Duan Lingtian. What a joke! Besides possessing a peerless and monstrous natural talent in the martial Dao and an extremely shocking background, the person before him was also the disciple of a formidable sect of the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom. "Kid, you actually dare call my uncle by his name? You're courting death." Suddenly, a grim shout resounded out, and it caused the expression of the young man in luxurious clothes to darken. Whoosh! Practically at the instant the young man in embroidered clothes finished speaking, the young man in luxurious clothes had already swung a slap over, and it left behind a red mark on the young man's face with the slap. The young man in embroidered clothes was stunned. The bystanders in the surroundings were stunned as well. What exactly is going on? Feng Tianwu, Feng Wu Dao, and Elder Kong was shocked by the scene before them. Cousin brother, you've hit the wrong person. It's him. It's he who called uncle by his name. The young man shook his slightly dazed head as he looked at the young man in luxurious clothes and spoke anxiously. Slap. But he hadn't finished speaking when another slap struck him. Cousin brother. The young man in embroidered clothes was slightly sober now and realized that he might have gotten into trouble, and he didn't have the time to ask about it before he was raised up like a hawk carrying a chick and thrown of the horse's back by the young man in luxurious clothes. Subsequently, the young man in luxurious clothes descended from the horse as well. Kneel. The gaze of the young man in luxurious clothes went cold when he saw the young man in embroidered clothes that had fallen on the ground in a sorry state intended to stand up, and he kicked out to make the young man in embroidered clothes to fall before Duan Ling Tian's feet. Cousin brother, The young man in embroidered clothes lay prone with his face touching the ground and was in a hideous state from his fall, and he turned around and seemed to want to ask something. Slap. Another slap swung over and caused his face to swell up. Kneel. This time, the young man had been beaten to the point of completely sobering up, and he realized that he might have caused an extremely great disaster. Even though he was unwilling in his heart, he still knelt obediently on the ground. Right when the young man in embroidered clothes felt injustice in his heart and didn't know what had happened, he saw to his shock that his cousin brother, the third young master of the Su clan and the next inheritor of the position as Su clan's patriarch, had actually bowed before the violet-clothed young man that he threatened to tear apart earlier. Commander Duan. After the young man bowed, he saluted Duan Ling Tian respectfully. Commander Duan? The young man in embroidered clothes was stunned when he heard what the young man in luxurious clothes said, and then he couldn't help but say in a low voice, Cousin brother, you've mistaken him for someone else. As far as he was concerned, when had the Crimson Sky Kingdom had such a young commander? Slap. Another slap descended and struck the young man in embroidered clothes to the point he felt dizzy and his vision blurred. I'll tear your mouth apart if you speak out of turn again. The young man in luxurious clothes' voice sounded out, and it scared the young man in embroidered clothes to the point of obediently shutting up, and his heart was instead filled with terror. Who exactly is this fellow? Why is even cousin brother afraid of him? You're Suboya's son. Duan Lingtian glanced indifferently at the young man in luxurious clothes.